Welcome to this week's PromoChat Deep Dive. This week we are very excited to have our favorite guest, Erich Campbell, back on. Welcome, Erich.
Thank you for having me back on.
It's always a pleasure. You always do a great job, and I always try to make sure that there's new voices coming up. And then this week we're like, you know what, Erich's got a point. So, and it's been long enough, we can have him back on.
Yeah, you have to keep me at bay a little bit because I'll just be on all the time.
I told you it's a standing invitation for co-host, host, whatever. But yeah, you can just come back on whenever you want.
That's a dangerous thing to say.
You're just doing it for the Maple Ridge treats, aren't you?
Oh, I didn't even think about the Maple Ridge. I got excited, right?
Oh, good cover. Oh, sure. Yeah, didn't even think of them.
Well, I got to hide them from everybody else in here, you know?
This is true. You can do what Rich Patterson did and have it labeled super confidential, so it arrives and then it's just for him.
There you go.
Will work out perfectly. Well, this week I'm really excited for our topic because we took the week and we kind of covered like education and what you do after graduation, because we have our prom theme and now it's like graduation theme. And so our question this week was, the teachers we have can shape our lives in 100 different meaningful ways, but it goes both ways, and the same can be said for students. What's something you've learned from an industry newbie? What new perspective has a mentee opened your eyes to? And your response was, honestly, the thing newbies do best is work without the staid norms of the industry. They question things more readily and try new avenues. They're not nearly as susceptible to the because that's how it's done argument that gets us disrupted. And then you had the wonderful gift of free your mind. And I love this because it's this idea of like, we can get very stuck in this, like, well, it's how it's always been done. It's how we're always going to do it without really thinking about like, well, why do we do it? And do you have an example of like when a newbie's come in and been like, have done the why? Why do we do that?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, there's tons of things. Honestly, it's not so much specific examples necessarily as that they come up and ask about the why in everything, and it exposes things that we don't always think about. They ask about why a standard size is something on a hat. For embroidery specifically, that's one of those things that comes up all the time. People are like, why does my hat not look right while I'm running it? Something looks bad, the logo looks bad at this size, and they don't get that hats have this limited field you can work on, and that the machines kind of pull the hats out of register if you go too high. There's this structure inside of structured hats that makes them flop back and forth as the needle foot comes down, the presser foot comes down, the needle goes through. There's all these technical things that happen that we sometimes take for granted, but we don't always explain them. And that explanation is also good for our customers and for distributors to talk about that kind of technical side with customers as well. And we forget sometimes to explain that stuff. Also, they come in with new materials. I know, especially working in the kind of prosumer space where we have people who come from the hobbyist space, they are so much more willing to put a weird material on their machine. I mean, I know it sounds funny to say it that way, but they will take a material and figure out kind of the nature of the thing and use it for different methods. A really kind of strange little example, a recent one, we use 3D foam. It's we have a foam that we use to raise stitches up. If you guys know, you have a hat that has a big thick logo on it, especially a lot of sports stuff, big thick lettering is very common. Stands up, there's a piece of foam that's under the stitching. Recently, I had somebody who was working on straw hats, something you do not see a lot for us, but straw summer hats, big thing in the home market. And they were like, you know what? I bet you if I put a piece of foam underneath it, it would make it stand up off of the bill. And I could use really thin foam because I don't want a big 3D effect. I just want to get the texture to look better off of the top of the straw. And she did that, and suddenly she had this really great looking piece. And I'm like, I would never have thought of that because she's using materials that I would never expect. I'm like, straw hats on a machine. Well, it's going to look bad. This are the 5 things why you wouldn't do that. Here's the texture. And even though I'm more willing than most people I know to put weird stuff on the machine because I'm also kind of an amateur in the way that I love what I do. I just start experimenting if you leave me alone. Hence, I'm in the lab right now. I'm still thinking about what I could do this afternoon now that I've locked the doors and nobody knows where I am.
So you pull out your bag of stuff and you're like, let's put this on the machine.
I could reach behind me right now and there is a bag of things I want to work on. Literally, there is a bag of stuff. And that's,
oh my goodness.
Honestly, I get excited. Also, that's the thing too, for us, when the newbies come around, even if they aren't teaching you something, what they do is fire you up. They ask you a question, you have to stop and go, well, I haven't tried that. Can I layer 3 layers of foam together and do different heights? Well, I haven't really done a lot of that. And I've done some of these things, but you're like, well, I don't know why you couldn't. Yeah, the presser foot would take that kind of height. Well, yeah, I guess you could. I just haven't done it. How would that be done? What would it look like? And because I know more about the materials and about the digitizing side and the machines, maybe their idea that was just a, shot in the dark, they're like, I really want to do a multi-level design. Well, for me, I'm like, well, I've got all this technical knowledge about how it works, but I haven't tried it. Now I can start developing that out with the skills I already have. And it's a faster iteration for me to get from, I already know how to do 3D foam to a couple layers of 3D foam than someone else who's like, I have no idea. I've seen a hat. I just bought a machine and I want to do something different than the thing I already know. And even then, I don't know how to use this material at all. I just want to ask the guy who's teaching, hey, I had a concept. What is it like? And by the time I'm done, I'm like trying to develop a new, a new method for this thing that I'm going to turn around and probably teach everybody if I figure it out. So those fresh eyes are a big deal. That and other things I've seen, especially in the garment decoration space, people who are like, oh, well, we still have something in the phone book. What's Instagram? What's that? You show people your lunch? And I'm like, no, because people who are new, who they came from already using Instagram, or they look at it as, okay, it's a super visual medium. Why wouldn't I show all the work that I do? They get excited. They show their work. Somebody says, can you do that? And now we have a business transaction just like you would in any other form of social interaction. But I still know people who are like, who's interested in seeing pictures of my barbecue? And I'm like, number one, they actually are. Whatever it means to you. Yes, people want to see your lunch and your barbecue. It just is true. I can't tell you how many times I like somebody's, I'm in the park this week, and I'm like, why do I like their park pictures? I just do. It's like, oh, that's pleasant. Uh,
Yeah.
but if then they said, okay, and here's a product you might like that I'm working on, I think it's cool, I may look into that. I might start researching and dive into that stuff. And that's another thing. It's both in the technical space and in the space of how do we talk about our work, how do we show it to people. New people come from all these different angles, and they may not think of we have to do it a certain way, and they may think of new marketing techniques in general, or new sales techniques. I remember seeing the first Instagram bundles is almost what I call it, because it's so popular there, where it's like, here's a picture, here's a limited thing, and I actually taught it in a pricing class after I saw it. You can only have this garment, you can have this exact type of decoration, and 350 of them cost this, and exactly this, and that's the deal, and it's this price, one price. And I was like, it's a weird way to do it, but all those limitations made it possible for them to throw out a base price that doesn't have to be altered. And it means no quoting and no, it's not the way I'm used to doing work. I'm like, I take custom work in, I look at your art, I quote it, I go back to you with the quote, we discuss how it's going to get done, and then a price gets formulated, and then we work. This person's like, no, I'm going to tell you, it's like the old Ford adage, you can have any paint color of car as long as it's black. They do that. It's like, it's this shirt, it's this color, it's this many colors of ink, or this much stitching, and I'm willing to do it for this price. And it's can fit in the space of one square graphic, all the information you need. And it turns out for some people, it's a really viable way to sell. So that was something that without newbies, I don't think I would have thought to do.
Yeah. And they always, like, what I love about newbies is that, like, when they, like, as you said, it's like they come in and they ask the why, and then they make you explain the why. And I think there's so much value in that, in being forced to think through your own process or defend your own position. And then there's creativity. Like Promo Kitchen right now on the podcast has a series of like newbies and I don't want to say oldies because it makes people feel bad, but but it's like the newbies. Newbies versus vets. That's the line.
There you go. Industry veterans. I've heard that one a few times.
I was like, it's not oldies, but it's kind of oldies. But it's that idea of like a lot of people are coming in from different industries and they're bringing that experience and that voice and that why as well, because that why can be totally different. Like the bundles are not an odd thing in any other industry.
Oh, no.
You're new in this industry or with embroidery. So how do you think of it that way? Like how do you, and in that way, they've kind of standardized customization to make it easier for how different generations and different industries buy.
Oh, I mean, some people did do them. I mean, but doing them on a flyer, it kind of, there's a period where that went by the wayside for some people, where it really was about how much custom stuff you can do. And you find out that you forget there's other kinds of clients out there. I had a lot of people who asked me, I taught classes on patches this year. It was something people have been asking me over and over to do, is teach how to make small run patches. And they're like, how could you possibly make money on small run patches? I'm like, well, number one, I did. Number two, here are the markets I did. And then I showed people that there was this whole community of pin and patch collectors. And it's this kind of sleeper community people don't know about, but there's massive conventions of pin and patch collectors. And it's not even about one type of pins and patches. It's just pins and patches. If you go look that stuff up right now, I saw the pictures from this convention in New York. It was massive, massive. And a lot of it is indie producers who are doing weird niche stuff, and they're charging fairly immense amounts of these patches. Everybody's like, okay, well, what can you get for a patch? $5? And I'm like, try 5 times that, try 10 times that, depending on the size and honestly, how niche the thing is. If you're willing to create something for people who can't find it anywhere else, who are excited to have that particular content, or you do a weird quality thing, how many of them I saw were, we've added some strange applique, it's got glow-in-the-dark thread in it, it has a feature or a function that's not common to the patches. It's amazing. And a lot of it's just like, it's an in-joke, it's something from some sort of long-tail obscure podcast or YouTube channel. I mean, the funny thing is you see newbies talking about that, but then who else do you see? Amazon with their merch program, who bought a fleet of digital printers. The larger groups are getting it too. Like, the industry gets it sometimes faster than those of us in the middle get it. You know, it's like sometimes these large scale producers get it, and then the very small scale gets it, and we're in the middle saying like, well, my minimum order is blah. And you're like, okay. I mean, we get where the minimum order comes from, but as much as, yes, that's a model that works, and if you tool everything to that model, you need to stick to that model sometimes to make it work with the way you literally have sometimes tooled your equipment in your shop and your workflow. But there really are other models that are also profitable that you can, if you wanted to, you can address. And seeing someone dip their toes in that space and explain that space to you, you're like, now that I see where you're aiming, I know the technical side of what you need to do, and it makes sense to me how to get you there. And it's amazing that they bring in that new model. So it's like, I remember when all of the subscription boxes started. I know that has somewhat kind of died down a bit, but there's still
not at all.
out there.
They're even more coming out. I swear I get a
The
new
buzz about it.
Yeah.
It's accepted that it's a thing. I remember before where they're like, all these people are willing to pay monthly for a box of stuff, and everybody's freaking out. And I'm like, wait a minute. Now it's just a given. It's just a given. Can I find a subscription box about knitting? Yes. Can I find one? There is a subscription box for just about everything, including some of the nerdier things I'm into in the world. So I know that they exist because I've seen them and had somebody try and offer me one.
It's incredibly niche. It's really amazing. I mean, it's a business model of like getting a bunch of free stuff and then having people pay for it. It's like
pretty much, yeah.
But it's huge, and you know, I love it because like I can't remember the name of the guy who did it, but he did a subscription box for promo products. So he worked with a few different vendors, and he would send out the logos and they'd send it in, and he'd send out these different things and people would get orders from that. So it's like he kind of took that model of subscription boxes and applied it to the promo field of being like, well, here's a regular gift, what do you like, let's figure it out from there.
That's so cool, because then it's like it opens your eyes to a new thing. And I mean, and that's, like I said, it doesn't matter what sphere of what we do this is in. It's just the idea that somebody doesn't come to it saying this is impossible. They come to it saying, is this possible? And if you stop and have to explain it, like you said, if you have to defend your point of the standards we have, sometimes you're like, well, yeah, that is technically possible. And you also find out, and it's the same thing I said with the patches, it depends on your market. When I was doing stuff, and I still sometimes do things for TV and movies, someone will hand you $100 for one patch, because when it's important to them for a particular usage and it has to be done quickly, $100 to $300 means nothing to their shooting budget. It just doesn't. Whereas to you, you're like, I just made one patch and it was $100 and I feel like I robbed them. Do I close all the doors and put the shutters down so they don't come back and, burn me out with pitchforks and torches? Feels weird if you're used to charging the regular custom rates we are. But there's always this market where you're like, okay, if you can convince somebody of the value of this thing, you can do crazy stuff. You can, like, I remember we talked briefly about this. Everybody should know there's a little pre-show where we talk about other stuff before we get to this. And we're talking about a project.
Lot before we even start recording.
Cover a lot. We get warmed up. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But I had a job which I was working on. I did the spec models for these really high-end shower curtains for a big hotel in New Mexico. And the first one I did every hooping myself on a machine that wasn't a span machine. It didn't have a border sash frame for people who know what that is. I had to move the hoop over and over in little things and line it all up. And I had a 9-foot span that I did, 15 inches at a time. And it was incredibly difficult, cost a great deal of money. We told them exactly what it would cost. The thing was, nobody else was willing to take it on. They didn't know. And even though this is a customer, this is still somebody who was new to custom embroidery. They were used to ordering things off the shelf, and instead they wanted something custom. They had never done it before. And no other shop in the region would even try to make the model for them. By the time we were done, I had made the initial model, charged just an immense amount. You've never seen a shower curtain cost $600 before, but that one did. And then, after that, I went and said, I know how you do these in production. Let me find someone else who can produce them at scale. I worked on the technical side of how does my design need to scale up so that it's at the right repeats for a sash machine. And then I subbed that out. So by the time we were done, I knew more about that side of the work, about doing home decor. The people who were on the end of it, the customer knew what it took to get it done. We had charged quite a bit of money and then made a lot on honestly, on subcontracting, because we were the only people who would touch it. And so the other half of having a newbie, whether that's a client who has no idea what you do or someone who's new that you're teaching in the field, the other half of it is now you gain more information and you might find this new market that works for you and know how to address that a second time. If you then take that, and we talked about Instagram, then you get into the storytelling mode and say, here's this piece. Now that I know how to make this thing profitable, let's show you these pieces. Let's get on an Instagram, let's get on Facebook, wherever we show our work, show these pieces, explain them, and then someone else who's been desperately looking for this sees your work and takes you up on it, and you already have a model in place to make it work a second time. I mean, there's not a lot of downside to that. I know we can go on wild goose chases and sometimes these things don't work, but that's how we get to these new markets. These new markets don't just come by themselves. You have to get experimental.
And that's the thing is, like, I think that's what we should start thinking about right now, because like the why pin and patch is getting really popular is like, sure, you can do smaller production runs, but you have to think about the recipients. Like the recipients sure will get these and customize their jackets. Like Nordstrom had a whole like pop up with, I think it was Levi's that did it, where you would come in and you get a jacket customized with different patches, and you can go and further customize it with that. And people will get stickers and put stickers on their water bottles and pins. Like in one of our SIG line, we worked with different artists. We have a custom artist line, and one of our artists, Queenie from Queenie's Cards, awesome, she does a ton of pins, and like you should go look at her Instagram, because she does super cute kids designs.
That's super cool.
Actually, just super cute designs, and she does these pin boards where all the pins she's collected, and she'll organize it via color, via theme, and they're amazing. But like these things, like if you'd gone to anyone in this industry 5 or 10 years ago and go, you know what's going to have a big comeback? Pins and patches. You would have been laughed out of the room, because people are like, no, that's had its time, it's out. But what makes it really amazing is the true customization. Like it's something, it's inside jokes, it's like pop culture, it's just a cool design. Like I've bought patches that I just think are cool designs, but sure, they're people's ways of taking it and making their own product, their own items, further customization, custom to their cells. So if we were smart, which I think we both are, but we're not doing this right now.
Well, we're trying to make everybody else smart, right? Everybody listen to this part.
Yeah. Everyone, don't steal my ideas.
but totally do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm already working on it, whatever. We'd be looking at the next product that can be taken and customized even further. Like, how do you find something like the pin and patch, like stickers? Like, who knew stickers would have such a comeback? But stickers are having a massive comeback.
Oh, hugely. In fact, funny enough, with apparel decorating, I just had somebody recently ask in a group that I was in. They're like, okay, well, what other things can I do to kind of add perceived value to the garments that I send out? And I was like, oh, sticker hang tags. It just hit me immediately. I was like, that's what I would do. If I was doing something custom like that and I want to look like I'm a big retail organization, sticker hang tags. So it's a hang tag that has a die cut sticker on the hang tag that you tag to the garment, and then here's your one more chance for you to put your branding somewhere where the customer takes it, peels it off, and sticks it to their laptop, sticks it somewhere else, and suddenly they're a brand ambassador and they get your garment and you look like you gave them a free gift, which we all know it doesn't cost an immense amount to do, but it increases the perceived value of this decorated apparel immensely to do. And now that everybody's figuring out digital production in every sphere, the minimums on things like sticker hang tags aren't what they used to be. I still have this in my head sometimes. I get to this point where I remember promo products where they're like, if you don't have 1,000, we don't talk to you. That's not how it is anymore. It's not 1,000 piece or even 500 piece minimum for a lot of stuff anymore. it makes sense. Even as I would say, even in the apparel decoration space I'm familiar with, even if you weren't doing this for a customer, I can make a really good case for saying, yes, 10 cents a unit for my own logo on a sticker hang tag. If someone doesn't pay for their own tagging, if I tag it and I ask them if that's okay, that is worthwhile to me. Just
Yeah.
to say, okay, you know what? Let me do, if you don't mind, yeah, I will individually polybag the stuff you're going to give to your team. Do you mind if I put a tag in it? And if you've got a bagging machine already and it's not a big cost, you say, okay, figure out the costs on that and say, all right, how much is it worth for everybody in some intramural sports team or adult kickball, any of the stuff that's going on right now? If every person who all work for companies, a great deal of them do, who all may have purchasing power at these companies, opens up a nice poly bag that has their garment in it for their new league, and the first thing they see is a hang tag with a cool design sticker from your company in it. That's an immense amount of power advertising wise for a pretty cheap, addition, and it makes the piece look really well put together. So
Yeah.
I mean, and funny enough, that's another thing that was very new. I wouldn't have necessarily thought of that, but I was like, okay, when people come in with retail expectations, and I have that a lot for my students, they come in and say they see something in retail and figure they can just do it.
Yeah.
They assume that they're one embroidery machine. Now, funny, it's like, sometimes like, no, you're going to have a lot of attachments by the time you have sequins. And it's like, yeah, like 5 processes went into that. That's sublimation and flip sequins. And like, there's 5 things actually that you're going to need before doing that. Maybe subcontract all that.
Yeah, you're gonna want to learn a lot.
But they come in and they have these ideas that are, they shoot for the moon. It's like we always say, shoot for the stars and land on the moon. They do that a lot, where they aim really high, but where they land is above where they would be at that initial state in their career. And so I think it's another newbie thing that's really useful, is the not putting a cap on everything, number one. Number two, not standardizing. It's really easy for us in production when we get into efficiency mode to go, okay, I use 40 weight polyester thread. I don't do a left chest that's over 3.5 inches in any direction, and I don't do anything more than this many stitches because it slows me down, or whatever it is. You may have some other reason you do that, and whatever material you work in, there are these things we do that just reduce pain on normal business to business orders. When someone comes in with something out of the ordinary, instead of saying no, say, okay, well, I'm going to charge what this really is worth to me to get it done, and let's see what happens. And it's surprising how many times you're like, once you've justified the fees, you might find an entirely new niche that you didn't think to exploit. And it's entirely because somebody comes in and just asks you very, naively, or a student, if you're somebody teaching, asks you, can this be done? And you're like, yeah, it can.
Yeah.
Expect somebody to ask me to do it.
It's like with us, it's like we always, if someone's like, can we embed it? We're like, maybe. Give us some to try and we'll see what we can make out of an award for it. So yeah,
Yeah,
and
right?
yeah, like the defend your why on why you do it. And sometimes you just don't do it because it's really annoying to do. But then
Oh,
again,
sure.
defend your why on that. Like, is it annoying?
Well,
The person was annoying?
and honestly, a good portion of it sometimes is just like there isn't money in it, and the person doesn't have the
Yeah.
budget, and then we all get educated. The other thing you sometimes do is the newbies do get put back down, and it's not bad, but you just say, okay, well, no, we can't do all of this weird work you want to do. Like, no, we're not, cutting everything out of heron cowhide and making appliques. And it's like there's things that you were doing as someone who was working maybe in a craft market or for Etsy that on a piece-by-piece basis at scale doesn't make sense for our equipment or whatever else. We have that kind of stuff happen pretty frequently. I'm like, it's a really cool idea, but there's nothing we can do that makes it scale any better than what you're already doing. But then you stop and say, but here's a product that you could add to that mix, or that you might change, or here's I see what you're trying to do. What about this? What is the thing that I do know how to do that gets closer to your goal? Like, okay, what you wanted was something rustic. What I do know about is I have a wool blend thread that looks really rustic and rough, and it doesn't look like the stuff that I usually use. It's not something I use, but if I change a couple needles on my machine and I change some tensions up on those needles, I can make a really rustic craft-looking logo without changing anything else in my process. And yes, I'm not doing, one-off cowhide appliques or whatever weird thing that they brought in, but I'm like, I can get you a rustic look and I can do it at scale. What about this? And that conversation between the two of you can bring up these new products that didn't exist before.
Yeah,
So
and it's so true. Like, you can't discount experience in this. Like, newbies are great and they're wonderful, but it's also like we had a quick our pre convo was like we talked. I like, there's so much about embroidery. Like, I don't work
Sure.
in embroidery and I know nothing. And you were explaining like stitch tension, stitch material,
Oh,
fabric
sure.
material, like everything else, like embroidery, like how you do this and this and this.
Hmm.
And I have no idea. And I think as people, as newbies, the
Hmm.
quest should constantly be, how do I figure this out? Like, go to
Sure.
factory tours. Like, they cannot be discounted as to the true value of them, of
Hmm.
just learning like, why are screen charges, like, why does screen charge, why do you charge for digitization,
Sure.
why does it matter about this and this? And I think some people can be very cocky about what they don't know, but they also can be very caught up in the day-to-day work and not think about it beyond that moment. They're like, well, I'm really busy, I can't go learn this right now. It's like, well, this learning experience is going to like change so much for you in the future, so it's
Yeah.
going to save you time then, so learn now and be busy later.
Well, especially when it comes to the fact that you're going to have this palette of tools, this arsenal, where you can say, when someone comes to you with a question and you immediately can get back to them and redirect, it means not contacting the factory and then getting back to them. There's value in that. Also, you become the person with answers, and like we always say, we don't want to sell items. We don't want to sell objects. We want to sell solutions. We want to sell ourselves as the people with answers. And that's a big deal. I mean, you can't discount that either. Though there's nothing wrong. I've said this a million times. Like, if you really have the customers like, hey, buddy, like, I don't want to know how to get on that machine and embroider. I want shirts to show up Wednesday, and you're like, that's fine. But also, if that person then is willing to say, all right, I have somebody, I have a person who I can call for this, and they're willing to pay because you're the person with the answers, that is a perfectly viable way. If you're a distributor and you just say, okay, I know who does this and I can get them on the horn and make this thing happen, that's also fully viable as an option. But I will say, for at least for me, because I also had to learn a lot of other decorations, because I'll be honest, I've never pulled a squeegee, which freaks people out. I've never screen printed. I've done art for screen printing. I've done everything up to films and burning screens. I have never actually been on a manual press pulling a squeegee. I didn't do that. So, but learning about it made a big difference, because I was the newbie too, thinking, oh, it's print. How hard is print compared to what I do? We all think what we do is hard. What everybody else does must be easy. And when I realized how technical it was, I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, I understand why screen print is what it is, and I understand why you have to do these limitations on the art. And I found it super enriching, and it made me able to answer people when we're talking about the differences between the two, or why lead times are what they are, things that customers do need to know. It's a lot easier. We can just absolutely pop right back and say, this is why, this is why it is the way it is. Also, really great, like we said, for redirecting. Someone has a project that's not going to work for what they want it to work with, materially or time wise. You can say, here's what won't and here's what will. And once you get some of those things together, you're like, okay, well, yeah, we can't screen print in that period of time. We can DTG. We can't do this with, I know you have this material, you like to do this, but we can sublimate instead. We can, if you know a little bit about decoration processes, it makes it easier. And I think with promo stuff, it's more, with me, it was also, okay, I know I can't get this type of item in this time period, but I know what items I can get quickly,
Yeah.
or which styles are kept, and which things what can I do in given the other parameters I've now been given. And a lot of that just comes from having some experience around the board.
Yeah.
So,
And you're never going to discount experience, but also don't discount change either.
oh no, that's the best thing, I think. And honestly, I don't mind being on the other end of it these days, where I know there was a time in the career where I'm like, oh yeah, I know about that, and I'm also calling my guy who I have who knows that stuff. I'm like, okay, hey, I just got this great question
Yeah.
about this kind of material. Can you even press on this? What is this? I don't even know if I can do that. I'm like, okay, I'm sitting here and I've got a vinyl cutter, 15 minutes, and a weird cooler, and I'm pretty sure this isn't going to stick. What do? I don't want to melt this thing in the press. Like, we've all done that, and that's fine. And I think, even like I said, I'm always bringing it back to apparel, decoration, accessory, stuff like that.
Mhm.
But I think it's any place you're in. There's a point at which we have to get to this security in ourselves to go, I really know my space really well. If somebody comes and brings me a question, a totally viable answer is go, you know what? I don't know anything about that, or I don't know enough to tell you an answer right now. I think I know people who can help me on that, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Or there are some times where you stop and say, yeah, it isn't my core. It's not something I can do, but it's good to have other people and say, I can direct you to the right person, because you'd be surprised how many times I have sent a customer out of my ecosystem and said, I can't do this for you, but I know who can. I appreciate it. let them know I sent you. So whatever cachet I have, you can take with you, and
Get good
I'll
karma
send you
points. I'm going to want all of them.
that way. Whatever you want to do, or if it helps you get through, if they don't know who you are when you show up, fine. Here's somebody who does know what they're
So
doing.
Eric, you're like, use my name. Use my
Yeah,
name.
use my name.
Just mention Eric.
No, not like that. More like when you tell them your order and they think you're crazy, tell them I thought it was a good idea for you to talk to, but I get the blame more like. But yeah, here's this person who I think can do it. And I can't tell you how many times I had somebody come back for another project and go, yeah, we used these guys for this project, but then I thought we would come back to you first and see what you thought about this new project. And then a lot of times it is in my wheelhouse. Or I've used that time to say, okay, well, I can't do this project. Here's somebody who can. These are the kind of things I do here. So if you want to use me later for these kind of things, I'd appreciate you coming back. Love to have you as a customer. But here's the person who you need to talk to for this thing. And invariably, they, believe it or not, they take into heart. They're like, okay, a person was not so enthused about money that they were going to gouge me or whatever, and they did direct me to the right place, and now I do kind of know what this person does, and they seem knowledgeable. When that job comes up, they come back. And I think that's a thoroughly viable thing. Plus, the other thing I like about teaching and newbies who are in my industry is that sometimes they come to me with these new concepts and I help them work it out technically, but it's not something I would do. And then later when I need that work, I can go back to the person I taught and go, yeah, you know how you do, like, you're doing custom patches on shoes? I don't even quite get this. Like, this person, I got a sneakerhead online too, and they are asking me stuff about specific shoes, and I have no idea what that means. Like, I don't know which version of Yeezys that they are talking about, but you probably do, and I'm just going to send them wholesale to you right now.
Yeah.
And you can custom lace patches that fit their eyelet pattern. I have no idea what this is. And sometimes it's great to be able to be like, okay, this person works in auto upholstery and it's not my jam, even though it's still embroidery, and maybe they had a question about threads or tensions or stitches or digitizing that I helped them with. I can go back and, like, this guy needs upholstery work done, and he's gotten to a place where it's no longer embroidery and I don't know what I'm doing. I want to send that to that newbie who's passionate about that side of it and say, go help them with the custom upholstery. You need help with the file, you know who to get to for the embroidery part of this gig. But once it's past that, it's your jam. You know this place, or how the trade shows that they're going to work, or whatever that is. I mean, you end up building your network with these newbies too.
Yeah. And it's true. It's like, because it's that idea of, like, you may not know it, but that doesn't mean you don't know it yet.
Right, exactly. And then invariably, like I said, there's just these models that are out there, and there's so many ways, especially in this very interconnected world we're in, so many ways to make money on these small audiences. And you may not even know these audiences exist until somebody from the audience decides to become a producer or a distributor. And then there's all these interesting things. Here's, to bring it back to that niche thing again, here's another thing in the pins and patches department. People may not know how popular Dungeons and Dragons has gotten again lately. And if you're somebody who's producing stuff, you now know this because you've already made something. If you don't know what a D20 looks like or polyhedral dice, you will shortly, because they're getting really popular again. And I actually, what's weird is I like sometimes to watch weird videos or stuff. I listen to stuff while I work and digitize. One of the things I listen to is a bunch of voice actors who have recently gotten popular playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons, because it's like a radio play. It's awesome. So I listen to that sometimes when I digitize, and then suddenly they got incredibly popular, did a Kickstarter where they made like $10 million to fund a project of theirs. And what did I see within moments of that? I had already known some individual people who I helped to teach. I taught somebody one time who made dice bags for Dungeons and Dragons 5 years ago. Now every patch pin group has Dungeons and Dragons material in it. Every person who's asking me about digitizing, who's new, a bunch of them come in and say, I want to make something for, like I said, like dice bags or something that goes on my table, or I'm trying to, like, do a custom felt cover with designs on it where people put all their stuff out. And I'm like, if you had been in on it earlier, it's immense the kind of work that came out of this really niche thing. We don't always know what's going to take off, but if we listen to these newbies come in, I mean, how many people thought, yeah, tabletop gaming, totally coming back, going to be a resurgence, millions of dollars in it?
Yeah.
Buddy. But if we listen to the newbies coming in who are coming from these markets, we don't know. We don't know what's coming out of that. And there's immense opportunities right now. If you're somebody doing drinkware, I don't know why you aren't thinking which one of these things is now like a dice shaker or something. I'm stuck. I'd be starting to retool my line right now, going,
reposition and pivot?
yeah, it's like, what can I do if I'm somebody who makes, like, is my messenger bag properly sized for RPG books right now. Like, what do I have in my market? Now that I saw these guys do a $10 million Kickstarter, I'm like, okay, wow, there's a big market out there that probably isn't being fully exploited on a major scale yet. What can I do to make that work?
Well,
So
it's,
I mean,
and yeah, like niche, like we're in the world of niche, and especially with the innovations that happen with technology, is like,
oh yeah,
scale doesn't matter in the same way, and
yeah,
the niche does. Like, your interest in your things, and it goes back to like the idea of customization. Is like, how do you show who you are with different items? And
yeah.
that's
It's what
D&D.
we're doing.
I
Well,
have no idea, and I can hear Josh shouting at me all his thoughts and opinions on this, and being like, I should have been the one to do this.
yeah, right. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one
So
of
I
those
don't
things.
know it, but I know there's a huge community out there that loves it. And
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
$20 million is not a small amount.
No, no. I mean, this is like the most popular groups, but at the same time, it's like these markets are out there, and beyond that, there are people looking to service them that we can teach things to help them be good citizens. The other thing I get a lot is I work with a lot of people who come from the embroidery hobby and want to go into a semi-commercial space where they're selling. The problem I have is everybody's like, I literally had somebody jump on one of the podcasts I was on. They said, "Oh yeah, the crafter market," and they were like, they're upset about the crafters. They were really upset about how they charge and things like that. And I'm like, do you want to know how we get these people to be good citizens in our market? Is by teaching them. If we teach them and we help them to understand pricing and overhead, and the things that are the old staid business things that we need to know, if we teach them more about that, and help them with the technical side, then they can produce a product that's decent. When they go to order something that's in our scale, they may subcontract with us, who are already doing the larger scale work, because when they're doing small scale work, it doesn't always scale up. I know from watching somebody use a single head to produce 600 pieces in a week, it's not fun for them. They'd rather hire somebody else to do it, if they knew better. There is a market there, and we can help these people be good citizens in our market at the same time as understand these markets that we might not have understood for ourselves, and say, okay, well, this is interesting. Not that I'm going to, descend on somebody who, subcontract with me and try and take their market, but look out there and say, what am I not getting? How do I not get that maybe the person selling on Etsy has a real business just because they're out of their house, or maybe they just don't do as much scale as I'm used to. But if I had a number of these clients, what could I do to make their lives easier, and then build the scale I need to work the way I'm used to? And there's a lot of opportunity there. And like I said, the newbies don't think you can't. And if you find a way that they can, or you do there's weird things that just make sense on a different scale. I've had times where the price made enough sense to someone where I'm ordering at the scale I have to order at for minimums, but they were willing to pay for a quarter of the number of pieces, the same price I'm expecting to pay for the larger number. And we would literally sometimes order the 300 because we've got a relationship built up with somebody, give them the 50, charge them the price they're happy with, and I now have 250 patches I can keep selling to them when they order again and again. Sometimes you eat that, sometimes you don't, but if you're making enough money to make the initial order work, then it's okay. Like, once you stop thinking that the order has to follow the same pathway it always has, then you find these new avenues for how it works. And I mean, some of them aren't as simple as just, stashing some patches, but there is something to be learned there.
Yeah. And just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean you have to keep doing it that way.
It's the worst reason. The worst reason for anything. I hate to say that. I am somebody who loves traditions, and I love to know the history of things. But the worst reason ever to do something is because that's the way we've always done it. It really is. I know I put that in the answer, but it really absolutely is the worst reason to do something. If you don't know why, you should stop and think why.
Yeah. Well, you're the people who are sitting there being like, really didn't think Amazon would take off. And it's like, okay.
Oh, I remember that. I did e-commerce so early that I remember somebody saying, I just don't feel comfortable using my credit card on the web. That is the first e-commerce argument I had to fight was that. We're far from that right now, but I distinctly still have the memory in my head where people said, I don't know about putting my credit card into a website.
I think you've dated yourself there, Eric.
I know. Well, that's what I was trying to tell people. I was a teenager when I did my first e-commerce site. I mean, I was a kid. I was building websites. I was first starting to pre-college, be at the college, working in their lab, and I had a website that I built on the servers from my college. And my first e-commerce I built myself, like in table-based websites, and it had weird plugins and junk, and I was taking orders manually. I've been doing e-commerce since I was a kid, despite how it was very, very early. And I remember distinctly when people didn't trust buying books from that Amazon site.
Yeah.
nobody would have thought where we're at now. But we forget is we're like, oh no, yeah, but that's Amazon. It proved out. I'm like, well, what's Amazon that's going to be there in 20 years? What is life going to look like? I'm not saying we're going to get that, but being open to all these options is where we might find ourselves on the other end of that someday.
Yeah. Well, Eric, I think we have to wrap it up before people think that, we just go on forever, even though we could go on forever.
We very much could. Before this is a pain to edit and a feature-length movie.
Oh, we don't have it here.
Right.
Someone's shouting, you should.
We'll just take this alive. It'll be great.
You'll just tune in every week for the hour. Hour plus we do.
Right.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for being part of this week's deep dive. And we can find you on the internet where?
Usually at erichcampbell.com. Truthfully, I'm at social media everywhere under Erich Campbell. Once again, that weird spelling ERICH will get you a long way with Google.
Yeah.
And like I said, you find me at PromoChat also. So PromoChat Wednesdays, I will always be there when I can. And anytime you look in printwear every month, I'm there in printwear. And you folks who are out in the UK, Images Magazine, you'll see me in Images Magazine every month as well.
So you're everywhere, basically. You're just Eric.
I can't stop doing this, even when I try.
It's a volunteer problem.
Big time.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thank you. Thank you for our sponsors, Maple Ridge. And then everyone join us every week, PromoChat, Wednesday at 3 p.m., noon Pacific. Okay, take care. Bye.
Thank you for having me on.
Did I stop?